Do you know that feeling when pain goes so deep that it becomes part of your blood, flowing through your veins with every heartbeat? I lived with that kind of pain for 7 long years. A pain that started in my back, traveled up my spine, and lodged in my throat every time I heard the key turn in the lock at 6 o'clock in the evening. And with the sound of that key came the fear, a fear that even now, at 71 years old, still wakes me up sweating in the middle of the night. Good morning to everyone watching this. My name is Margaret Wilson, but folks here in Millfield, Ohio know me as Grandma Maggie of the Sweet Shop. I've been making fudge, toffee, and butterscotch candies that people say are the best in the county from my little store on Main Street for over 40 years now. Who would have thought, right? The little girl who once didn't know if she'd live to see the next day is now known for making sweets that bring joy to children. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please tell me in the comments what city you're from, and if you can, leave a like and subscribe to this channel. Each subscription gives me more courage to keep telling what many people prefer to sweep under the rug. I was born in 1954, in a small white clapboard house, at the end of Maple Street, in the poorest part of Millfield, a small town where everyone knew each other, or at least thought they did. Because secrets, oh, the secrets stayed well hidden behind closed doors, and our White House, with the always drawn curtains, held the worst ones of all. My father, Richard Wilson, worked at the county courthouse as a clerk, a respected man in town, with a firm hand for pounding tables, a deep voice that made the floor tremble. He went to church every Sunday, sat in the front row, sang the hymns louder than anyone else. He was the first to arrive at neighborhood meetings, and the last to leave the bar on the corner. A man of his word, they said. An exemplary family man. My mother, Elizabeth Wilson, was an elementary school teacher. Hair always pulled back in a tight bun, dress below the knee, nails cut short to the quick. She had a rigid posture, a way of looking over her glasses that made any mischievous student return to their seat. At home, she was quiet, obedient, like my father's shadow, a shadow that grew and diminished according to his mood. It was just the three of us in that White House. My mother had other children, but none survived. I was the only one who did. A miracle from God, she would say. Sometimes I think the real miracle would have been not surviving. It would have saved me a lot of pain. The house was simple, but clean. I remember the smell of floor wax, the shine of the few pieces of furniture, the crochet doilies my mother made to cover every surface. We had a backyard with an apple tree, a swing and a concrete wash basin, where I played on hot days. That White House, my personal heaven and hell all in one, until I was 7 years old. Until I was 7, my life was normal. I went to school, played with the neighbors, helped my mother with small chores. My father was strict, would give spankings when I disobeyed, but nothing out of the ordinary for that time. That's how children were raised back then, with spankings, with belts, with switches from the garden. Nobody questioned it. But everything changed when I turned 8. I remember exactly the day it was my birthday. They gave me a blue dress with white polka dots and a rag doll my mother had secretly made. I was so happy that I didn't even notice my father's different look during dinner. A look I would learn to recognize later. A look of someone planning. That night, my mother went out to the church vigil. It was common every first Friday of the month there was a vigil, and she never missed it. I stayed alone with my father, something that had happened other times before. Usually he would send me to bed early and stay in the living room listening to the radio. But that day was different. "Come here, Margaret," he called from the kitchen. "Come help your father." I went with my new doll under my arm. He was leaning against the sink, looking toward the stove. "Look at that sink, girl. It's dirty. Your mother didn't clean it properly." I looked at the sink. To me it seemed clean, but disagreeing with my father wasn't an option. "I'll tell Mom when she gets back," I said quietly. "No, you're going to clean it now." I tried to explain that I was too small, that I couldn't reach properly, that the cold water from the tap hurt my fingers in that mild Ohio winter. But there was no reasoning with him. I climbed onto a stool, began to wash the few dishes. I did the best I could, but like any 8-year-old, I did things like a child would spilled water, left soap on the dishes. I don't know exactly when it started. See why your mother never wanted other children after you. Because she saw that you're good for nothing. The words hurt more than any blow. I lowered my head and continued trying to clean. Tears clouded my vision. Not even good at that. Useless. Do you know what happens to a useless girl? She deserves punishment. He took the wooden spoon that was in the corner of the kitchen, a long-handled spoon used for stirring the big pots of stew. I thought he was going to hit me on the legs with it, as he had done other times. But that's not what happened. Take off your clothes. I froze. I didn't understand why an 8-year-old girl would take off her clothes in the kitchen. What? Are you deaf? Take off your clothes now. Fear paralyzed me. I hugged the doll tighter. Dad, it's cold. Take off those clothes. The shout was so loud that I dropped the doll to the floor. With trembling hands, I took off the new dress, stood only in my underwear, hunched, trying to cover myself with my skinny arms. Everything. Take off everything. And there, naked in the middle of the kitchen. I felt a shame I had never felt before. A shame mixed with fear, with confusion. Why would a father want to see his daughter like this? He took the wooden spoon, pressed the handle against my stomach, and slowly moved it downward. I felt the cold of the wood on my skin. I closed my eyes. Look at me. I couldn't. I kept my eyes closed, my body trembling. Look at me. I opened my eyes. I saw a man who was no longer my father. He was a monster with his face, a monster with hungry eyes. What happened next, I won't describe in detail. Not out of shame, I washed that away long ago, but because there are children watching this video, and I don't want to put in their little heads the images that still live in mine. I'll just say that it hurt. It hurt so much that I thought I was going to die. The wooden spoon handle. He used it in a way no object should be used, in a way no little girl should feel, in a way no father should ever do. When he finished, I was bleeding. He threw my clothes at me. If you tell anyone, I'll kill you and your mother. Now clean that floor. I could barely stand. I cleaned my own blood from the kitchen floor, while he returned to the living room, to the radio, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just destroyed his daughter minutes before. I dragged myself to my room, wrapped myself in the blanket, and cried until I had no more tears. The physical pain was terrible, but the pain in my soul was worse, because I didn't understand what I had done so wrong for my father, who was supposed to protect me, to do that to me. When my mother returned, I thought about telling her. She came into my room, saw that I was awake. What's the matter, child? Can't you sleep? I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. The fear was too great. What if he carried out his threat? What if he killed us? I ended up just shaking my head. Then go to sleep. Tomorrow's a school day. And she left, closing the door. Just like that. She didn't see my tears. She didn't notice my fear or pretended not to notice. That night, something died inside me. Trust, security, childhood. I thought it would be just one time, a punishment for not cleaning the sink well. But I was wrong. In the weeks that followed, whenever my mother went out, he would find a pretext the house wasn't clean. I got home late from school. My grades weren't good enough. Get the wooden spoon, he would say, and I would obey. Because what else could an 8-year-old girl do against a grown man? The worst came when I discovered that my mother knew, or at least suspected. One night, I came home from school with my skirt dirty with mud, because I had fallen on the way. My father was furious. To the bedroom, he ordered. You know what's going to happen? I went trembling. He came behind me with the wooden spoon. But this time, I noticed that the door didn't close completely. Through the crack, during that horrible time, while I was writhing in pain on the bed, I saw my mother standing in the hallway. Watch, our eyes met in the middle of that horror. She saw my suffering, my silent plea. And do you know what she did? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. She quietly closed the door and left. That's when I understood the true betrayal. It wasn't just him, it was her too, the person who should have protected me, defended me, fought for me against the whole world, had chosen to turn her back on me. That night, I cried differently, not just from pain, but from complete abandonment. I was alone in the world, alone against the two of them. The abuse continued for months, years, becoming more frequent, more violent. He no longer needed to wait for my mother to go out. He did it in front of her, and she watched, sometimes with her eyes lowered, sometimes with a strange gleam in her gaze, never intervening, never protecting me. Once, I tried to resist. I was 10 years old, a little bigger, a little stronger. When he came with the wooden spoon, I pushed him, tried to run. I managed to reach the front door, but my mother blocked the way. "Where do you think you're going, Margaret?" "Let me out, Mom. Please. Go back there. Your father isn't finished." And she pushed me back toward him, like someone returning a borrowed toy. The changes in my body began. My chest growing, hips widening. First menstruation that I hid as best I could. I was afraid that would make everything worse. And it did, because now my father had a new fear that I would get pregnant. "If you bring a bastard into this world, I'll kill you," he threatened. "I'll throw you in a river where no one will ever find you." But he continued with the wooden spoon, just being more careful, using it in other ways, inventing new ways to hurt without leaving evidence. At school, I became the strange, quiet girl, always in long sleeves even in the heat, sitting at the back of the classroom. I didn't play during recess. I didn't talk to anyone. I never smiled. My grades, which had been good, plummeted. I couldn't concentrate. How could I pay attention to English when my whole body ached? How could I learn math when all I could think about was the horror waiting for me at home? The teachers noticed something was wrong, of course, but in those days, it was different. In husband and wife quarrels, no one should meddle. The saying applied to all family problems. Family problems were family problems. Only one teacher insisted, Mrs. Peterson, the art teacher. Short, curly hair always pinned back, big glasses that slid down her nose. She had a different way of looking at me, not with pity or disgust, but with understanding. One day she called me after class. "Margaret, is everything all right at home?" The simple question almost broke me. It had been so long since anyone had asked how I was. I opened my mouth to answer that yes, as I always did, but I couldn't. The tears came uncontrolled. I didn't answer. Finally, "It's not all right at all, is it?" I didn't respond that day, either. The fear was still greater than the pain. The fear of what he would do if he knew I had spoken. The fear that they wouldn't believe me. After all, who would believe a little girl against two respected adults in town? "If you need to talk, I'm here," she said simply. And for the first time in years, I felt that I wasn't completely alone. At that time, I was already 13 years old. 5 years of daily abuse. 5 years of having my childhood stolen, my body violated, my soul broken. 5 years of watching my own mother be complicit in my torment. 5 years of wanting to die every night, and waking up disappointed to still be alive the next morning. That's when everything got even worse. The White House was no longer just my hell. It had become my complete prison. My father began to lock the doors when he went out, forbidding me to talk to anyone. The wooden spoon, always the same one leaning in the corner of the kitchen. A constant threat. I would look at it and tremble, even when I was alone. I began to have terrible nightmares, waking up screaming, sweating. Sometimes I wet the bed. At 13 years old, which only gave more reason for punishments. At school, I hardly spoke, hardly lived, but a spark of anger began to grow inside me. Anger at first small, which grew each day. Anger at the injustice, the pain, the betrayal. Anger that turned into courage when I understood one thing. If I continued like this, I wouldn't survive. It was that simple. Either I spoke up, or I would die. It was on a Wednesday when everything changed. An ordinary Wednesday, blue sky, tremendous heat. The wooden spoon had been used the night before. After I dropped a glass in the kitchen, I could barely sit in the school chair from so much pain. Miss Peterson noticed the way I moved uncomfortably, the way I held back tears. At the end of class, she again asked me to stay. This time, she locked the classroom door. "Margaret, what's happening in your home?" I remained silent, looking at the floor. "Margaret, look at me." I looked. I saw in her eyes something I had never seen in my mother's eyes. True compassion. No one deserves to suffer, Margaret. No one, especially not a child. If someone is hurting you, you can tell me. I will help you. And then, after 5 years of silence, I spoke. The words came out like an uncontrolled flood, dirty, devastating. I told everything: the wooden spoon, the blood, the pain, the mother who watched, the constant fear, the threats, everything. She listened, without interrupting, without judging. When I finished, exhausted, she had tears in her eyes. "I believe you," were the 3 most important words I had ever heard. "I believe you, and we're going to fix this." That afternoon, on the way back to the White House, I felt something different in my chest. I didn't know the name for it yet, only later did I understand it was hope. Do you know what betrayal is? Betrayal isn't just the story of the husband who cheats. No, betrayal is when someone who should protect you turns their back, when you need them most. It's worse than any slap. It's a stab wound that doesn't heal. That's what I experienced with my own mother, Elizabeth, a woman who taught the alphabet to hundreds of children in Millfield, but couldn't teach her husband that a daughter is not an object. A woman who prayed the rosary every day but closed her eyes to the sin happening under her own roof. At first I thought she didn't know, that she didn't realize. How could a mother see her 8-year-old daughter limping in pain and not ask anything? How could she see the blood-stained sheets and pretend it was normal? I made 1,000 excuses for her in my head. That maybe she didn't see, that maybe she didn't understand, that maybe she was afraid too. But that night, when our eyes met through the crack in the door, while my father used the wooden spoon, all the excuses died. She knew. She had always known. At that time, I had just turned 10. It had been almost 2 years of daily abuse. My child's body already showed marks, not just the bruises that disappeared, but the invisible ones that never went away. The way I would flinch when someone raised their voice, the habit of sleeping under the bed instead of on it, the terror of wooden spoons, of doors closing, of the sound of a belt. It was around that time that my mother began to participate more actively. Not in the abuse itself, that was only my father, but in the preparation, in the logistics, in the afterward, as if it were part of the house routine, just like washing dishes or sweeping the floor. "Margaret, go take a bath. Your father is coming," she would say with the same voice she used to tell me to do my homework. Casual, as if it were normal, as if all the houses on the street had the same disgusting routine. I obeyed. What else could I do? I had nowhere to run, nowhere to flee. The house was small, the windows locked, the door with a padlock, and even if I managed to get out, where would I go? We were isolated. I had no close family, no trusted friends. I only had school, and even there I was the strange girl no one wanted to be near. One afternoon, I came home from school, a little late. I had been delayed because the teacher asked me to stay and clean the blackboard, a small punishment for falling asleep in class. When I entered the house, my mother was in the living room, knitting as if nothing was going to happen, but I felt in the air that heavy smell of problems to come. "Your father is waiting for you in the bedroom." I stood in the middle of the living room, my backpack sliding from my shoulders, fear freezing my stomach. "Mom, please. I was just late because—" "I don't care. He's waiting for you. Go quickly before it gets worse." Worse, as if there were a mild version of that horror. "Mom," I tried again, my voice breaking. "Why do you allow it? Why don't you help me? Finally, she raised her eyes from the knitting. But I didn't see love there. I saw something else: irritation. Help? You think you deserve help? If you were a good obedient daughter, he wouldn't need to correct you. Correct? That's what she called it. As if it were an adjustment, a course correction, as if sticking a wooden spoon into a little girl were a teaching method. But Mom, this isn't normal. This hurts. Dad shouldn't. I didn't finish. The slap came quickly, burning. She had never hit me before. She had many flaws, but physical violence wasn't one of them until that day. Shut your mouth. You think it's easy? You think it's easy for me? He's your father. He has a right. And you provoke him with that body, that way. I cowered, tears streaming. She was saying it was my fault, that I, a 10-year-old girl, provoked that I deserved it, that it was normal. Now go. Don't make him wait any longer. It was the first time she raised her hand against me. It wasn't the last. From then on, her complicity became more explicit. She moved on to preparing the ground. She would send me to bathe beforehand, make sure I was presentable for my father, arrange the bed afterward, wash the stained sheets, treat the more visible wounds, so no one at school would notice. It was as if I now had two monsters in the house, not one. There was one time, I remember well, when I got sick. High fever, aching body, probably a strong flu, the kind that knocks anyone down. I thought that at least that day, I would have peace. My mother made tea, put a wet cloth on my forehead. For a moment, I felt that care that every little girl deserves. I closed my eyes, almost relieved. That's when my father entered the room. I felt the mattress sink with his weight as he sat down. I opened my eyes, silently pleading with my mother, begging that at least this once, just once, she would protect me. Do you know what she did? She left, closing the door behind her, leaving me there, burning with fever, too weak to fight. That night, the wooden spoon came even though I was sick. In fact, it was worse, because he said he needed to get the sickness out of me, that it was the only way, that it was for my own good. When he finished, my fever had worsened. I was shaking, delirious. I heard my mother arguing with him on the other side of the door. Richard, you're going to kill the girl this way. And then what? How do we explain it to people? It wasn't concern for me. It was fear of the scandal, of what the neighbors would say. For her, I wasn't even a person. I was just a potential public embarrassment. I was in bed for a week. At school, they sent a note asking about my absence. My mother responded with careful handwriting. Margaret has a strong flu. She will be back soon. Signed and sealed, as if it were an official document. When I returned, I was thinner, paler, quieter, if that was possible. Mrs. Peterson looked at me differently. I felt she perceived that something was wrong, but I still didn't have the courage to speak. Not yet. At 11 years old, I tried to escape for the first time. I gathered a few things in a market bag, a change of clothes, an old toothbrush, a rag doll I had since I was little. I waited for them to fall asleep and tried to open the window in my room. It was nailed shut. I tried the front door locked, key in their room. I tried the kitchen, the same. The entire house was a prison. It doesn't surprise me that no one ever suspected anything. No one could get in. I couldn't get out. Perfect for what was happening in there. I cried silently, sitting on the kitchen floor, the pathetic bag in my lap. There was no way out. There never would be. That's when I noticed the wooden spoon there, leaning in the corner as always, the instrument of my torment, his weapon against me. I felt a hatred I had never felt before, a hatred burning inside, consuming me. I grabbed the wooden spoon. I thought about breaking it, throwing it in the yard, hiding it, anything to have one night of peace. But in the second I touched it, I heard footsteps. What are you doing? My father, standing in the kitchen doorway, in pajamas, disheveled hair, bloodshot eyes. He had woken up to get water and found me there with the wooden spoon in my hand. What happened next was the worst. Until then, It wasn't just the wooden spoon. It was the belt. It was the slap. It was the punch. He beat me until I passed out. I woke up the next morning on the kitchen floor, so hurt that I couldn't even open one of my eyes. My mother found me there, looked, sighed. See what you do? See what you provoke? The blame, always the blame, as if I, a child, were responsible for his sickness, as if I had chosen this. I didn't go to school that day, or the next. I only returned when the bruises were less visible. They claimed I had fallen down the house stairs, stairs that didn't even exist. Our house was one story, but no one questioned it. Her complicity became increasingly explicit over time. It wasn't just omission, it was active participation. She began to create situations, pretexts. She would complain to my father that I hadn't swept the yard well, that I had answered back, that I was taking too long with homework. Margaret needs correction, Richard. It was the code between them. Correction. Disgusting. I began to perceive that she liked it, not what happened itself. At least I want to believe that, but the power it gave her. Seeing me being punished for things that weren't even wrong, seeing me suffer while she watched. Superior, correct, clean. One afternoon, I came home from school, and she was different, agitated, dressed up. She had put on the good dress that she normally only wore to church. Today we're going to your Aunt Martha's house, she announced. Your father will be working late. We'll have dinner there. Just us two. Aunt Martha wasn't even really an aunt. She was a friend of hers, who lived on the other side of town. We rarely went there. I didn't understand the sudden change, but I felt a small hope. A night away from home. A night without him. A night of peace. I got ready quickly, combed my hair, even tried to smile. The idea of getting out of those walls, even for a few hours, was like a glass of water in the desert. We were almost leaving when my father arrived earlier than normal. He looked at the two of us already ready to leave. Where do you think you're going? To Martha's, my mother answered, her voice already submissive. Just for dinner. We'll be back early. I've changed my mind. I need both of you here. And that was it. She didn't even question it. She took off her shawl, her little jacket, went back to the kitchen to prepare dinner, as if it had no importance at all, as if the promise of a night of relief for her daughter meant nothing. That night, I cried into my pillow, until I fell asleep. Not because of the abuse that had already happened, as it did almost every night. I cried because of the betrayal, because of the ease with which she gave up protecting me, because of the certainty that between him and me, she would always choose him. With each passing day, I felt more trapped, more desperate. I started to wonder if this would be my life forever. Endless abuse, endless pain, endless betrayal. But sometimes, when things seem darkest, a small light appears, just enough to guide the way forward. And for me that light came in the form of Mrs. Peterson's unwavering concern. At 13 years old, I was at a breaking point. I had been suffering for 5 long years, and I knew I couldn't endure much more. My body was weakening. My spirit was nearly broken. Every night, I prayed not to wake up the next morning, and every morning I was disappointed to find myself still alive, facing another day of torture. But something was changing within me. The fear that had kept me silent for so long was slowly being replaced by something else. Anger. Not just any anger, but a righteous fury that burned deep inside, giving me strength I didn't know I had. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. I began to observe my parents more carefully, looking for patterns, for weaknesses, for any opportunity that might present itself. I noticed how my father was always more careful when there were guests coming over, how my mother was more nervous when school events approached. They were worried about appearances, about what others might think. Their perfect facade was their weakness, and I began to understand that I could use it against them. The Wednesday when everything changed was ordinary in every way. Blue skies, hot summer air, the usual dread in my stomach as I walked to school. The night before had been particularly bad. I had dropped a glass in the kitchen, and the punishment had been severe. I could barely sit at my desk without wincing in pain. Mrs. Peterson noticed immediately. Throughout the art class, I felt her eyes on me, concerned, watchful. When she asked me to stay after class, I wasn't surprised. This had happened before, her gentle questioning, my fearful silence. But this time was different. This time, she locked the classroom door. "Margaret," she said, her voice firm but kind, "what is happening in your home?" I stared at the floor, my heart pounding. The words were right there, stuck in my throat, desperate to come out. "Margaret, look at me." I raised my eyes, and what I saw in hers changed everything. Not pity, not judgment, but pure, genuine compassion. The kind I had never seen in my mother's eyes. "No one deserves to suffer, Margaret. No one, especially not a child. If someone is hurting you, you can tell me. I will help you." 5 years of silence shattered in that moment. The words poured out of me like a flood. Every detail, every horror, every betrayal. I told her about the wooden spoon, about my mother's complicity, about the locked windows and doors, about the threats and the fear. I told her everything. She listened without interruption, without judgment. When I finished, her eyes were wet with tears, but her voice was steady. "I believe you," she said, and those 3 simple words were like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. "I believe you, and we're going to fix this." Walking home that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. A fragile, tentative hope, but hope nonetheless. Mrs. Peterson had a plan, and for the first time I allowed myself to imagine a life beyond the White House, beyond the wooden spoon, beyond the daily torture. What happened next was like something from a dream, or perhaps the end of a nightmare. Mrs. Peterson contacted Child Protective Services that very day. By evening, there was a knock at our door. Police officers, social workers, people with badges and documents, and stern faces. My father tried to bluster his way through it. My mother cried and denied everything. But the evidence was undeniable. The medical examination revealed years of abuse. The psychological evaluation confirmed the trauma, and when they found the wooden spoon, the very one I had described in detail, hidden in the back of my father's closet, their fate was sealed. They were arrested that night. I watched from the back of a social worker's car as they were led away in handcuffs. My father red-faced and shouting, my mother pale and silent. I felt no satisfaction, no victory, just an overwhelming sense of relief. The days and weeks that followed were a blur of court hearings, testimonies, and questions. I was placed in a foster home temporarily, but Mrs. Peterson applied to become my guardian. "I made a promise to help you," she told me, "and I intend to keep it." 6 months later, I moved into her small, sunlit apartment on the other side of town, living with Mrs. Peterson. Sarah, as she asked me to call her at home, was like learning to breathe again after years of suffocation. Simple things that most people take for granted were revelations to me. Eating without fear, sleeping without dread, speaking without calculating every word. She was patient with my nightmares, understanding of my triggers, and steadfast in her support as I slowly, painfully began to heal. My parents were sentenced to prison. My father for 15 years, my mother for 8, as an accomplice. Their trial made headlines in our small town, shocking the community that had looked the other way for so long. Some people didn't believe it, couldn't reconcile the respected clerk and teacher with the monsters described in court. Others admitted they had suspected something, but hadn't wanted to interfere. The guilt in their eyes when they looked at me was almost worse than their disbelief. High school was difficult. Whispers followed me in the hallways, pitying glances from teachers, awkward silences when I entered a room. But I had something now that I hadn't had before: strength. Each day was a battle, but I was no longer fighting alone. I graduated with honors, something that would have been impossible in my previous life. Sarah beamed with pride at the ceremony, and for the first time, I felt like I had a future, a real future, not just the desperate hope of escape or death. I was accepted to Ohio State University on a scholarship. Leaving Millfield was both terrifying and liberating. In Columbus, no one knew my story. I could be just Margaret, a college freshman with dreams of becoming a psychologist, not that poor abused girl from the headlines. College was where I met David. Kind, patient David with his easy smile and gentle hands that never ever made me flinch. Our relationship moved slowly, carefully. He understood without me having to explain when I needed space. When certain things triggered memories I'd rather forget. He waited until I was ready. For everything. When he proposed after graduation, I knew I was saying yes not just to him, but to the future I had once thought impossible. We moved back to a town near Millfield after I completed my master's degree in psychology. I wanted to be close to Sarah, who was getting older and had done so much for me. I opened a small practice specializing in trauma and child abuse. David taught English at the local high school. We bought a little yellow house with big windows and no locks on the inside doors. Our children came along a few years later. First Emma, then James. Motherhood terrified me at first. What if I didn't know how to love them properly? What if the damage done to me had broken something essential inside? But the moment they placed Emma in my arms, I knew that the cycle was broken, that the poison that had infected my childhood would not touch hers. I watched my children grow in safety and love, something I had been denied. Every milestone, first steps, first words, first day of school, was a victory, proof that some wounds, even the deepest ones, can heal, not completely, perhaps. There are still nights when the nightmares come, still days when a certain smell or sound can transport me back to that white house. But those moments no longer define me. Sarah lived to see both my children born, to see me build the life she had helped save. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep at 78, she left me her house and a letter that I keep to this day. "You were always stronger than you knew," she wrote. "I just helped you see it. My father died in prison 10 years into his sentence, a heart attack," they said. I felt nothing when I got the news, neither joy nor sorrow. He had ceased to be real to me long ago, transformed in my mind from a father to a monster to, finally, just a sad broken man who had inflicted his own brokenness on others. My mother served her full sentence and was released when I was 26. She tried to contact me once, a hesitant letter full of excuses and half apologies. I didn't respond. Some betrayals run too deep for forgiveness. I heard she moved to Florida, remarried, died of cancer a few years ago. I didn't attend the funeral. As I grew older, I became more involved in advocacy work, speaking at conferences, training law enforcement and teachers to recognize the signs of abuse. "Be someone's Mrs. Peterson," I would tell them. "Be the one who notices, who asks, who believes." When I turned 60, I decided to retire from my practice and do something completely different. I bought a small storefront on Main Street in Millfield, the same town that had once been my prison, and opened a candy shop, Grandma Maggie's Sweet Shop, specializing in handmade fudge, toffee, and butterscotch candies. People ask me why, after a career helping trauma survivors, I would switch to making candy. The answer is simple. Because every child deserves sweetness in their life. Because I want to be the person who brings joy, not just the one who helps process pain. Because there's something healing about creating something purely for delight, with hands that once only knew how to shield and protect. Now, at 71, I sit in my shop each day, watching children press their noses against the glass display case, their eyes wide with wonder. I keep a special eye out for the quiet ones, the ones with long sleeves in summer, the ones who flinch at loud noises. Sometimes I give them an extra piece of candy, lean in close and whisper, "You matter, you are important, you are seen." Sometimes that's all it takes, knowing that someone sees you, really sees you. I started making these videos to reach more people, to tell my story to those who might be living their own version of it right now. If you're watching this and recognize yourself in any part of my story, I want you to know you are not alone. It is not your fault. and there is a way out. It might seem impossible now. It might seem like no one will believe you, like no one will help. But I promise you, there is someone out there like Mrs. Peterson, someone who will see you, believe you, fight for you. You just need to find the courage to speak, even if your voice shakes. The White House is long gone now, torn down years ago. They built a small playground on that spot. Whenever I pass by, I see children playing, laughing, free, and I think that finally, that piece of land has found redemption. If you liked my story, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This helps more people find these videos, understand that they're not alone in their struggle. Because if there's one thing I've learned in these 71 years of life, it's that the human spirit is incredible in its capacity for reconstruction, for turning ruins into palaces, for transforming houses of terror into colorful homes of love. I am Margaret Wilson, victim turned survivor, survivor turned warrior, warrior turned grandmother, and storyteller. And my story isn't over. As long as there's a child who needs to hear that there is hope, as long as there's a woman who needs to know that abuse doesn't define her, my voice will continue. Because freedom smells like rain-soaked earth after a storm, and after the most terrible tempests comes the brightest sun.